All right, Wendy.
Yes.
Wendy, where are you from?
I am from a small town in southwest Minnesota.
And tell me about how you grew up.
I grew up childhood of chaos. I was kind of a feral child for a lot of it. It's a lot of chaos and I would say emotional torment, like mental abuse, but to the point of torment. So when I was born, I have 4 older siblings. My 3 sisters and my 1 brother are 7 to 13 years older than me. And my mom and dad, my mom had all 4 of those siblings by 22. And then at 30, she had me. And they were convinced that I was a boy and named me Max. And so my first year, I was Max with the nursery to match and the wardrobe. And I was kind of the fix-it baby, but I didn't fix it. Anyway, when they decided to decided to give me an actual girl's name, they went with Wendy. My mom wanted to do Holly, but Dad said that was a whore's name. So I kind of was already born into like a predisposed judgment, I suppose.
Was there like mental illness in the family? Or?
Yeah. So there's a lot of that. So basically, so my dad didn't fix the marriage, and I was like a shiny new toy. They all loved me, and Dad continued to have his affair with our veterinarian. We're farmers in Minnesota, pig farmers, and my mom was the homemaker. And my dad had an affair with our female veterinarian, and then he died in a tractor accident when I was 2. And obviously I don't remember any of that. So I just have like pictures and the stories. The stories I have, I actually didn't hear what really happened to my dad's death until I was probably like 35 when my mom told me. But I always heard the versions my siblings told me. Basically, it was a farming accident, and he was the tractor collapsed on him, and you know, he died instantly. My brother Tony witnessed this or came upon it shortly after it happened, and then my mom, I understand, found out about it and went up there and saw it and whatnot. And then I guess it was just kind of chaos. My mom just, of course, lost her mind. She's stuck now with 5 kids, and they were in the process of a divorce. So my very religious Baptist family, paternal family, really just kind of dismissed us because we were, you know, we already had 1 foot out the door, and we were just like the black sheep. So my mom really dove into the alcoholism, and her grief was like the main event of my childhood. So the first few years, she was really non-existent. She was either in bed, or she was off with her friends, or off at the bar. All the memories I have were, the early memories I have were at the cemetery. A lot of time at the cemetery, or many instances where I was left alone at the cemetery. I don't know what she would do or where she would go. And it really just went like that for those first 5-6 years. My siblings, on the other hand, the girls in my family especially, just really, they loved me, but they like just hated me at the same time. They tortured me. Like I was, they always said I was so beautiful. I was born so beautiful. And they hated me for that, I think. So like they would dress me up at 3, 4, 5 in adult clothing. And, you know, not exactly child pornography because I was dressed, but in a very seductive poses and whatnot. And then in the family albums, the pictures would be, and I don't condone this language. They're very racist people, but the labels they had on me, and my nickname was Beaner. So I'm labeled as the sleazy Beaner in the family. And that was a label in the family books I just found a couple weeks ago. So anyway, my mom was just non-existent, and my siblings raised me. Carrie and Carla were the really rambunctious and the worst of them. They would take me along wherever they'd go on their adventures, tearing up the town. They were very, very rebellious and just anarchy wherever they went. In our small town, one of my core memories is helping them create a human dummy and then throw it off the building at oncoming cars, off the Main Street buildings, and, watch accidents and stuff happen. That was at like 5. They also trained me in things that I didn't understand. Like when they asked me at school what I wanted to be when I grew up, I said not a virgin. I didn't know what that means, but as a 5-6-year-old kid, I'm sure a lot of the other kids didn't know what it meant, but it's still like that. It just burns a hole into your soul, those things, and already being born. Like my biggest sin was being born with a vagina, basically, in our family, and I was taunted for years because of it. And then around when I was 7, my oldest sister, Lisa, who was like my other mother, she got married. She did all the things she was supposed to do. My brother, Tony, joined the military, and Carla got her trust fund, and she adopted, she got emancipated from my mom legally, and she was able to get custodial guardianship of my older sister, Carrie, but I was too young, so I was left there. And my mom married a man she met at the bar. She didn't tell anybody. They just, while I was at school, got married. The memories I have of that time are really, really sporadic. He was a really bad man. He was very sadistic. He really enjoyed hurting my mother and hurting me. He had a paddle with a wooden 2x4 or like a board he'd made in Dazed and Confused, had my name on it, and he drilled holes in it for, aerodynamics and more pain. And I remember being there and hearing the sound of that drill, and every hole burning into that paddle just makes me just nauseous just thinking about it, just the sound. And then, of course, he'd have to be naked from the waist down. My mom would watch. My mom always loved me. She always said she loved me. I always knew I was loved, but they never showed it. It's one thing to say you love someone, but to actually love someone is different. And I didn't have that. Another memory I have that really haunts me from that period, one of the times after he would discipline me, as he called it, and my mom would watch, they were really horned up by it. They got really worked up and could hear them having sex afterwards, and I remember my fingers just going numb and plugging my ears so tight and my head just not being able to feel my fingers, just like that. Just hearing them enjoy it so much was just damaging to a little girl, I didn't understand, but the pain or the damage it does mentally, that your mom and this man that she puts before you are sexually aroused by your suffering. The marriage didn't last long. He was really abusive towards my mother. Again, that's very sporadic memories. The physical abuse with me was minimal. He would force me to eat food. He was Italian, so I didn't like marinara sauce or, red sauce, and that was a big no-no. So they divorced, and we ended up moving back to our house, and then my mom just she really went off the deep end after that. My father was a very present figure in my life, though, even though he was dead. She raised me with the Ouija board as my father. And it seems so, it's hard to just say that out loud because I know how ridiculous and how insane it sounds. But as a little girl, we would sit on the side of her bed and she'd say, let's talk to Dad. And, sometimes it would be, like we're really poor. We didn't have any money. My mom was never good with money. So like she'd get her Social Security, and she never worked. So she'd get her Social Security on the 3rd of each month, and then we'd live like queens on the 3rd. And then we'd have absolutely nothing for the rest of the month. And to this day, I still struggle with that. But like the Ouija board, it'd be like, big money is coming, all those things she wanted to hear. And like, Wendy, you need to work better on that science project or whatever it was. I mean, it was just so insane in hindsight. And I was such a little girl, I believed, and she was so religious. And everything was, God will get you, like I can't discipline you or, I can't control you because I was such a wild child because I was feral for such a long time because she was just so absent and, all my siblings were gone. I had to raise myself and cook for myself and clean for myself. And it's just so wild, but I just really believed it. And I prayed to the man in the sky. And I worshipped the ground, or worshipped my father as if he was a god coming down from heaven, talking to me on a daily basis about my grades or, whatever it was, this boy I liked, or whatever questions 8-year-old Wendy would ask. My siblings would be there too, not Lisa, not the oldest. She was too smart. But I remember Carrie, Carla, and Tonio being there at least some point. They'd also the religious aspect was really prevalent. Like I said, my mom really pushed God on me. She'd drop me off at church on Sunday mornings, the Baptist church where, my dad's church, and we're all where I'm related to half the congregation, but we're black sheeps, and I was so poor, and I always loved fashion. I loved style, and I, was grown up with my sisters dressing me in my mom's clothes, my aunt's clothes, my older clothes, so I would dress myself in adult clothes and I would put on high heels in my tiny feet and I would shuffle into church and they'd just drop me off and the kids, and I would just like, oh, I look so good. And then the kids in Sunday school did not agree. They just made so much fun of me. And, she was poor. And her dad, I was made fun of because we were poor. I was made fun of because my dad was dead. I was made fun of because my mom was non-existent. I was made fun of because my mom was at the bar and forgot to pick me up at Girl Scouts or whatever it was. So as soon as I would walk in and I would be so just like full of, like, just so proud of myself. And then it would just like smush me down and just tiny, and I would just like, oh God, she would just dump me off and then she'd pick me up at the end, and sometimes she'd forget or sometimes she'd oversleep or spend too much time at the cemetery or coffee with her friends or whatever. So a lot of those memories are just waiting and waiting for her to pick me up or waiting for her to come home. The neglect was big. I had to tend to myself, take care of myself. Medically, my mom was on top of things, though. It was almost like a borderline Munchausen by proxy. Like if I would get sick, she would just coddle me to a fault. She'd share her Darvocet with me, which is like the opiates of the 80s. I had terrible asthma, and so I couldn't time the inhalers right as such a kid, so they'd just give me the syrup or the liquid. Of course, it would just make you wild, and it's like speed. So she'd be giving me, opiates as because I had a headache at 10 or whatever, and then break a pill in half, and then I can't breathe, so drink this liquid syrup. It's going to make your bronchioles open. If it's not working, just drink more and drink more and drink more till it gets better. And that's just how I was raised. Like you have a problem, you take a pill, you just take a shot, you take a drink, whatever. As a teenager, I was really rebellious, of course, and I got an inheritance, and all I ever wanted to do was just make it to 18. That was my goal, just make it to 18 when I got my trust fund. And then once I did, I spent it all on partying, drugs specifically. I spent the 30 grand that I got in 6 weeks. And I lived like a queen for those 6 weeks, and then I was gone. And I was just like this laughing stock. I felt like, all this humiliation and the trauma of my siblings and the people in school and whatnot. It was like all that I'd been waiting for my whole life was, and then all of a sudden it was gone. The man that I got to set my sights on this guy in school, and he didn't want me, and that just made me want him more. And I just knew that love was all I wanted. I just wanted to be loved my whole life. And so whatever few minutes he would give me attention, I just longed for it. And he just treated me so poorly, and I just kept coming back for more. There was one instance where he, just decided it was a blizzard, and he was living about 3 hours away, and he wanted me to come visit, and I was like, yes, absolutely. And like the interstates ended up being closed. It was up by Duluth, and just icy roads the entire way. And it took like 6 hours to get there. I was crying. I was white knuckling it the whole way. And I get there, and he changed his mind. He just decided to not open the door. So I'm sitting there in an apartment building after driving like 5-6 hours, like risking my life to get there. And I could hear him inside, like making breakfast and like, brushing his teeth and stuff. And he just didn't come to the door. And I just sat there and I just cried because I couldn't go back. So I just sat there and cried at his door until it got dark, and finally he let me in. And that was kind of just how the relationship was. Like I just wanted his attention. And I got pregnant, and he was convinced that I did it on purpose. And I was convinced that this was going to be like this baby was going to save me. This was finally somebody that's going to love me for the rest of my life, or, be there and not abandon me like everyone else did. And his dad, my son's dad, was just so awful, the abuse that I went through. There was a lot of physical, but the mental is what was the worst of it. He knew how vulnerable I was and how my mom really dangled suicide in my face as a child. And he would do the same. Like, for instance, he would just come home. I would work nights at a nursing home, and then I worked days at a gas station. As I was pregnant, he didn't do anything. But he would just come home from partying, and he's like, I'm going to kill myself. And he would take, like, the toaster and run into the bathroom and run the water. He's like, I'm going to throw the toaster in the water. And I would just scream and cry and just like, no, don't do it. And he would just come out and just be laughing. And then I'd have to go to work. I'd have to pull myself together and go to work. And it was just like that for just months. Like he would just fuck me and spit on me and then just walk away. And I had such poor self-esteem. Like, my worth was so small from the childhood that I just thought this was as good as it gets. Like, this is what it means to be married, because that's what I witnessed, with the few men that stuck around. So when I finally left him, Ash was bored, and Ash was just like my world. And Chaden continued to be a terrible asshole. And finally, I kind of dabbled, I was 21 at that point with a 2-year-old kid and an abusive boyfriend. And I started like dabbling back into partying a little bit. And, I ended up kind of falling back into my old ways. And then I met or reconnected with Tate from high school. And we got married. I remember settling for him specifically. I remember he had tucked me in after a night out, and he didn't try anything, which I was just amazed by, that a man could tuck you in and not hurt you or want to abuse you or take advantage of you. And he like kissed me on the forehead, and I remember the exact thought. I was like, he'll take care of Ash and I. And we got married. And, honestly, I really loved Tate. I did. But the problem with Tate is that he was so laid back. And I always thought of him as lazy, but he's just very laid back and just slow moving and just like, yeah, I'll do it later. But I would take that as insults, like when he wouldn't take the garbage out, or, if I'd ask him to do this and he'd forget, or, he's like, I'll do it later. I would take that as a direct insult, like as lack of love for me. Like, why don't you ever listen to me? Why, it was all just an insult, all the fighting I did with him was just that little girl. I'm fighting to protect that little girl, that vulnerable little girl on the inside. And then we had Mara. And I had Mara's name picked out since I was 5 years old. I think it was Guiding Light, one of the soap operas my mom watched. They had a little girl named Mara. And I was like, I'm going to have a little girl named Mara. And I'm going to name her Marlin, just like Wendy Lynn. And when I had Ash, I really wanted that little girl, but I also knew I wasn't quite ready. Like, I knew that little girl is like a chip off of, she's like a little Wendy, this little girl I was going to have, this little Mara. So I knew I wasn't quite ready for her yet when I had Ash. But when I was pregnant with Mara, I was like, this is going to be her. Like, this is Mara. And we went in for that ultrasound. I didn't have the opportunity to, know what the sex was with Ash. And I did with Mara, but she had her legs crossed. So I left crying that day. And then when she was born, I just remember them saying it's a girl, and I was like, she's here. Mara's here. Like, she's finally here. Like, I've been waiting for her my whole life. Like, that's my soulmate. And when I had Ash, that day, it was bittersweet. Like, of course, the day I became a mother. But also when we left for the hospital, his dad was like, oh, it's going to take all day, isn't it? Like, that was his line. And after I had Ash, all I wanted was a Hershey candy bar. And he was like, no, you're 180, because I gained a lot of weight. And he's like, you're 186 pounds. You don't need a Hershey bar. It's like, I'm 18 years old and I just gave birth to your 8-pound baby on no meds. And he denied me a Hershey. So, it was a great day of my life, but it was also very bittersweet too. There's a lot of trauma that came with that. But with Mara, it was just like everything came true, and I just held her and she just looked up at me. And I didn't nurse with Ash because my mom said it would ruin my breasts, and that was so superficial. But with Mara, I did. And that first time she latched on, it was like magical. And I'm so sorry that I never gave that to Ash. I didn't have that bond with him because I was so worried about the superficial side of it. But Mara was an amazing child. She was so sensitive. She was allergic to peanuts. She was sick all the time. She had terrible, severe asthma. A month after she was born, she had RSV. She was in the hospital 3 times. On her first Christmas, she had a temperature, I'm not even exaggerating, it was 105.5 on Christmas. I was like, please admit her. I'm only at 25. I'm like a 25-year-old baby. I don't know how to take care of this child, But she also had this terrible anxiety. Like, as soon as she had teeth, she would bite her fingernails. We would have to it would be like a nightly, she would bite her nails down so far they'd get infected. It was like a nightly routine that we'd have to dip her fingers, her little tiny fingers in like little shot glasses of peroxide to, so they wouldn't get infected. And Mara was magical. But the marriage to Tate after a while just wasn't cutting it. So we had our Save It baby, and we had Livia, my third daughter. And about 2 years after that, I decided to leave Tate. It had gotten really hostile in the house, and mostly just because I didn't know who I was, and I had so much inner turmoil and all that trauma of being neglected and those little things that he would just do because that's just the way he was built. I would take it so personal, and it would become this fight, just this constant battle. So I left Tate. And fast forward, there was a lot that kind of went on in between that. But at 15, when Mara went to high school, she just changed, like it got really, that anxiety got so much worse. And it was just like went from middle school to high school. It was like her posture started changing, and she'd be biting her nails more, and she wasn't eating, and she was starting to go out with her friends and, partying and stuff, and really kind of following in my footsteps in that negative light. But I was also so proud of her because I looked at her and I was just like, she's everything I always wanted to be. But I was just really blind to a lot of things, though, and really naive. So let's see, 9th grade, school starts around September. So it was around December that she came to me and she's like, Mom, I really need to talk to you. And we sat right there on the steps. Whatever we were doing, we just stopped. On the flight of stairs, we just stopped right there. And she said she had been thinking about hurting herself. And I was kind of taken aback, but I'm not surprised because with my childhood and history, I've got, at least 10 suicide attempts under my belt, all very feeble attempts, I know now. But I wasn't really surprised, but I was shook, obviously. So I called Dad, and we took her into the behavioral health center in town, and went through it, and they were like, well, we don't have any beds available. She's not in any imminent danger right now. We don't think she's going to harm herself tonight. Just keep an eye on her, get her in counseling. If it gets worse, bring her back. So it's like, please take her. I'm only a 40-year-old baby. I can't handle this. Please admit her, help me. And it kind of went a little better. And then like a week later, she was at Dad's, and he's like, she said it again. But the thing was, when she, that day when she told me she wanted to kill herself, I told her I couldn't live without her. And I made a pinky swear with her that if she goes, I go. So about a week after that, and they finally had a bed available, and they brought her in. And of course, the way they have it set up, they'll have the nurse call you, but you don't actually get to talk to the attending doctor. And they're like, well, we're going to prescribe her to Wellbutrin. And I was like, no. Like, I remember being at work in my cubicle, and my cell phone had broken, so I had to use my desk phone. And I got really upset with the idea of Wellbutrin because I'd known, I've been on so many antidepressants throughout my life. And I'd never taken them as directed, mind you. So they really didn't have a chance to really work well. But I knew that Wellbutrin, I had a negative side effects with it. I couldn't remember details, but something in me just said no. And I remember just yelling at the nurse, and I'm like, no, she has my blood in her veins, and it'll make her worse. Like, I know, just no, do not give her Wellbutrin. And I was like, please just let me talk to the doctor. And I'm getting like vicious with this woman. Like, I can be so sweet, and so, like, there's two sides of me, that sweet, soft little girl on the inside. And then like I the shell exterior comes out, and I just can become this vicious bitch, just a massive protector of myself, that child in me, and my children, and anybody that I love, and I will go up to bat for any of them. So there's, that dark inside, that vicious side of me came out, and I was like, fuck no, we are not doing Wellbutrin. I was in the office, like, everybody's like, what's happening? And she's like, you can talk to the doctor at discharge, and, you can share your concerns then. Fine. So, she stays there a week, 10 days or whatever, and we go to discharge. We kind of visited her, and when we went that day for discharge to meet with the doctor and whatnot, she was so excited to go home. Like, the light was back in her eyes. She just looked so beautiful and happy, and she was standing up straight again. And I was like, well, maybe the Wellbutrin is working. Maybe this is going to be okay. And so we go home, and it's kind of smooth sailing, this first month or so. And then Ash moved back in. He kind of had a falling out, I think, with his roommates. So he moved back in. So Livia had to sleep in my room. And Ash took Livy's room, and Mara had her own bedroom. And Livy would have been about 10, and Livy's on the autism spectrum. So even though she was, in a 10-year-old's body at the time, she's more like 7. So, so it was April, and Tate and the kids and I had a big fight. I got very defensive over something very similar where they hadn't helped me, and I felt like they were ganging up on me. And of course, that inner child, I was protecting her. And, it was a vicious fight, and Mara was like, I want to live with Dad. And when he told me she was going to come stay with him, I literally just screamed at the top of my lungs, like this blood-curdling scream, like I knew that was the end. Even though she's only going to be like 2 miles away, I'll still get to see her on the weekends after school and, whatnot. It's not like she's living there permanently. It's just for a little bit. So Dad has to go to Vegas for dart tournament. So he's gone. He leaves on a Thursday. And Mara comes home to stay back home with me while Dad's in Vegas. And she'd been really skipping school a lot and having a lot of trouble with her anxiety. And we had her in counseling, and she was going to group therapy. And, we're doing all the things. And every morning I'd be like, did you take your meds? And she'd be like, yes, Mom, I'm taking my meds. Or actually, she was a teenager, so it was more like, yes, Mom. But so Saturday night, she has her friend Natalie spend the night. And I go to bed early. And Livy and I go to bed early, like 9, 10 o'clock. And about midnight, Mara wakes me up, and she's standing at the door. I can still see her silhouette. And she's like, Natalie went home, Mom. I'm going to bed. I love you. And I kind of raise my head up, and I look at her silhouette, and I'm like, I love you too. Just go back to sleep. And then about 7:30 in the morning, Ash wakes up, and he's laughing, or he's like, comes to my doorway, that same spot, and he's like, Mom, you got to see Mara. She's sleeping so funny. She always slept really funny, weird positions, always, from when she was a baby to, 15. And so he's like, you got to see her. And according to him, he said he'd never seen me move so fast in my life. He said I bolted up, and I did. I knew instantly. And I ran into her room, and she's just on the other side of this wall right here. So she's no more than 6 feet away from me. She's half on the bed and half off. So I imagine, like, when you've drank too much and you have the spins, and they say to put one foot on the ground to level yourself. So she's like that, but face down. And I flip her over, and she's still warm. She's pale, maybe a little gray. But she's still warm, and I scream. I don't remember what I said, but I know it was a cuss. I'm sure I'm like, oh my fucking God. I meant something along those lines. And because Livy reminds me, being on the spectrum, she doesn't have a lot of tact. So just randomly we'll be in random situations and she'll just be like, why did you scream fuck that morning? So apparently I screamed fuck, and Ash called 911 and started doing CPR at her. And I was holding my baby in my hands and she's still warm. It was like, I'm doing the CPR and she's so frail. She'd been sleeping or wearing all these sweatshirts and stuff, and I had no idea that her, she was plummeting. Her weight was plummeting just like mine. She has an eating disorder just like I did. And so she's so frail, just skin and bones. And I'm doing, the compressions, and all I could think is I'm going to break her ribs. She's going to be so mad at me. And just doing these compressions as hard as I can, but also I'm like trying to be lenient so I don't break her. I'm so scared I'm going to break her. And I can't remember if I did mouth to mouth or not. And that's haunted me to this day. Like, why didn't I do mouth to mouth? Did I do mouth to mouth? I don't know if I did, because the memories are so sporadic. So probably 10 minutes later, the paramedics storm in, and they just take over, and I'm just bawling. So I called my mom, and I called my boyfriend at the time, and I call everybody I know, just in a panic, like I can't wake her up. I don't know what's happening. And I already knew she was gone, deep down I knew she was gone. I knew she was gone already. And I hate myself for that, because I think, did I already know she was gone and I didn't try hard? Is that why I didn't give mouth to mouth? Is that maybe I didn't push hard enough? Maybe, maybe I wasn't timing it, I played that in my head. So they're up there for 2 hours, and my mom comes in, and she's got this boyfriend now, and they were out of town. So she brings her boyfriend in. And my boyfriend's there, who I'd only been dating 6 weeks. We're in the honeymoon phase. And so he rushes over, and Ash and Livy are, I don't even know. And I'm just shaking. Tate's and my ex-husband's in Vegas, so I call him, and he calls his mom. And his mom, June, was just the most wonderful human. I can't imagine what it was like for her. Her and Mara had the most precious bond. I was very jealous of that as a mother. But about an hour and a half later, the officer comes down, and he said, I'm sorry to tell you, but we weren't able to save her. And I remember hearing myself scream, this belted out. And then I saw myself fall on the floor. And this is when I dissociated. And I remember this very clearly. Hovering, just like in the movies. Hovering over myself and saying to myself, you already knew she was dead. Why are you being so fucking dramatic? Instantly, hating myself for how I'm acting. I can't, I'm writhing around on the floor screaming in pain. And I remember the pain that I feel is in my heart, but also my breasts felt like when your milk comes in that first time and you hear a baby cry. It's a very intense pain. That need to nurse your baby, that mothering instinct. I just felt my breast just throbbed, like my baby needed me. And I just screamed, and I was like, I need to see her one more time. And the officer was like, I can't let you do that. And I was like, I'm fucking doing it. I need to see her. So they brought her down. I watched. It was not a winding staircase, but it was exposed. Kind of winding, but exposed still. So I see them, and they have her wrapped in a bag. They don't have her on a gurney. They have her in a body bag. So they're carried down this body bag. And they just lay it in front of me. And they made everybody go in the dining room and face the wall. So it's just me. And then they unzipped the bag. And her eyes were closed when I was giving her CPR. She looked like she was sleeping peacefully. But now her eyes were open, and the whites of her eyes are just covered in blood. And the blood is just running down her face like tears and out her nose. And I just remember saying, why is she bleeding? Why does she look like that? And they're like, we just tried so hard. We tried so hard to save her. Like, that's just, that's just the effect. We couldn't save her. And then they zipped her back up and they carried her out. And I fell to the ground again, I'm sure. It was all a blur. A lot of people came and went that day. And then when things quieted down, my oldest sister, Lisa, took Livia home. I don't know what Ash was doing. Ash was probably 20, 21 at the time. So God knows, I don't know what he did with his day. I just remember those bits and pieces. And then when everything calmed down, I turned to Aaron, my boyfriend. And I remember I dissociated at this time. And the protector, I was protecting that little girl in me. And the protector that comes out is that 18-year-old Wendy when she gets her trust fund, that vicious fucking bitch who just wants to party and nothing matters except for just getting high. And so that night that she died, I looked at Aaron. I said, I want to go to the Top Hat. And he's like, Wendy, you can't go to the bar. And I screamed in his face. And I said, I want to go to the fucking bar. And he took me to the bar. And I said, I just need normalcy. I know it's denial. It's denial, obviously. I wasn't denying that Mara was dead. I was fully and painfully aware of how dead my baby was. But I also knew that right after that officer left, I heard my mom call our doctor, because we're such an enmeshed relationship, our family doctor, and said, you have to prescribe her something. She cannot go on like this. She will die too. And something in me changed, like in that moment, and that was the fuel to that fire. And when they prescribed that Valium that day to keep me from just dying from the pain, that became it replaced the blood in my veins. That and anything that I could from that point forward until 130 days ago. Today's my 130th day clean. I spent every day since April 14th, 2019, sitting there, just self-medicating just to function. So starting that night, I just needed that normalcy. I was taking selfies. I was just so insane with grief. And I just didn't know what to do. So all I could do was just have more drinks and more drinks and more drinks and just smoke as many cigarettes and just make it go away and just keep popping those pills. And before the funeral even started, I had my first suicide attempt. That line, if you go, I go, just haunted me. The day that I needed to pick out the photos for the funeral, I took my laptop to the bar by myself, drank straight shots of vodka, and I picked out those photos. And I sat there and just sobbed by myself. 11 a.m. as soon as the bar opened, I spent all day there. And then I went home and I would just literally take handfuls of pills. And if I wanted my body to feel like how my heart did, is broken. Like I felt guilty that I could breathe, that I was walking, that I was surviving. I was just lived every day to fucking die from that point forward. I would take handfuls of pills. I would do anything that I could. I would sit there and watch the heart monitor. If my heart rate wasn't high enough, I would take more. I would do more because I wanted to die. I wasn't suicidal, but I wasn't. I wasn't suicidal, but I wanted to die. I didn't want to live like that anymore. And so I just killed myself every single day. Aaron ended up that first day after the funeral, or the funeral photos after I tried to kill myself that first day, he ended up breaking in my window and saving me. I was sleeping on Mara's bed. And then the funeral was very much a blur. It was very high just to get through it. My sister, Carrie, hugged me and she said, "You feel like a ghost." And I was a ghost. I couldn't cry. All the tears were gone. I'd cried so much. That shell had taken over. And I think of it, so I've since been diagnosed with borderline personality. And I know exactly what it is. I mean, since I've been diagnosed just this few months ago, it's like I've never seen myself more clear. I am a textbook case, that two sides of me, that party, vicious Wendy, and that soft, vulnerable little girl that wants to pet your puppy. There's those two sides of me. And that side of me, that vicious Wendy, came out that day at the funeral. And I think of it I always think of it like that ice cream fudge when pours on and like shells and gets hard when it hits the ice cream. I think of it like that, where I can almost feel myself going from, that vulnerable state, and then just something's activated or triggered in me that I feel threatened, and I feel like that hard cover coating taking over my body. And I felt it that day, that shell taking over, and I didn't shed a single tear at the funeral. I couldn't. All these people, hundreds of people, there's standing room. It was the most beautiful service, so beautiful. They paid such honorable tribute to her. And then that night I went home, and I'm sure I tried to kill myself. And it just kept doing it over and over again. Just kept trying to kill myself over and over again. I got a little bit of not a trust fund, life insurance, came with my employer at the time, just like funeral funds. And the funeral home in Sioux Falls where we had her funeral, it was so wonderful, because she was so young, they did it free of charge for minors. So that funeral money I bought a plane ticket for Livy and Ash and I. All I could think about is how Mara had never seen the ocean, how she never, I didn't even know if she'd kissed a boy, or a girl. She wasn't sure if she liked boys or girls. She had no idea. She was only 15. She was 15 years, 4 months, and 26 days. And so I took the kids to San Diego. I was just like, I got this money and I need to take my kids somewhere. We just have to live now. My whole life had just been survival. It was like, now I have to show them the world. And so somebody was just like, how about San Diego? I was like, done. So we boarded a plane, we went to San Diego, and I was so in denial. I was still in denial at that point, but I had that shell on. I knew Mara was dead. I knew it. It was burned into me. I could see her face. There was blood coming out her eyes. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd have tiny little dreams of her. Now those tiny little dreams are her smiling face. But at one point, they were the blood coming out her eyes. So these pictures, when we got to San Diego, it's like I'm on the beach. And I'm so just fucking delusional. And I was sitting there in my bikini just posing for photos. And Ash and Livy are in all black and just zombified, and I'm just and I didn't know it. I was just completely dissociating. I started hanging out with Mara's friends, the girls, and the boys. They took to me like a mother figure, as a confidant, and I took to them, they'd be like, Mara would be so proud of you, and, they'd tell me stories, and I'd tell them stories, and they'd come over, and I'd give them some of Mara's old clothes, they'd be like, oh, I have such a good memory with this sweatshirt. I'd be like, you have it. And then we got her autopsy results, and she took 90 times the therapeutic dose of the Wellbutrin, so she never took it. she had been hoarding. They gave her a 90-day supply. You do the math. She took all 90 pills. That night, before she took those pills, when she came to the door and she said that she loved me, she went in her room and she took one selfie. It was on Snapchat, so it had the filter. It was like this little, like, mousy one with glasses and the little mouse ears. And the picture, I see that too when I close my eyes. But she's just standing so tall and so firm. And she looks so stoic. And she has this little smirk on her face. It's like she's proud of herself, like she's free. And that picture haunted me so much for so long. But when I think about that day and how free she was and how happy she was that day, just like she didn't have a care in the world. You know, the dad had a note waiting for him when he came back from Vegas. So she had it planned. She had it planned for days. She had a note waiting there for him. She had a note for me as well. The note, it was your quintessential suicide note. You know, I'm sorry, it wasn't your fault. I'm so sorry, even though I didn't show it, I love you all, that sort of thing. But then at the end, she said, take care of the kitties. She left her cats. And she said, take care of the kitties. I'm okay now. Stay happy. I love you. And then this necklace here is her writing. And I have that tattooed on my wrist as well. And this is her fingerprint. So I keep this near and dear, you know, on big days like today, or if I'm doing something important, I just rub our thumbs together. And it's like I feel her with me. But that 4 years, you know, the person I became in that grief is so shameful. Like, I wasn't actively hurting people. I was actively hurting myself. You know, I only wanted to hurt myself, but I hurt everyone around me. Like I said, I gravitated towards her friends. Like I started hanging out with kids in their 20s, you know, that are younger than my son. I could have birthed these people I was hanging out with, you know, and they're all great. I don't mean to talk anything negative about any of my friends. You know, I've evolved past them and had to say goodbye now. You know, I woke up from that dark, dark place that I was in for 4 years. The multiple suicide attempts. Ash had to find me. Ash had to break in to the window and save me, just like we tried to save Mara. Livy has seen some shit. You know, I just thought I was untouchable. And the more I would try to hurt myself and the more resilient I would be, the harder I would try. You know, but I didn't want to die. I didn't. It was like every time that I would self-harm, whether it be, you know, a handful of pills that would knock me out for 2 days so I didn't have to fucking open my eyes and face this fucking world for a day. Or, you know, I wasn't like a cut or anything that would damage me superficially. That would never happen. So it was all internal. But I did, the darkest point was I came home from the bar and I tried to hang myself with my purse strap in the basement of my duplex that I was living in. And I hung it from the rafters in the ceiling. I had it all ready to go. I don't even know if I'd written a suicide note at that point. Like, I'd written so many and just threw them away and just like, you know, it was just like, they know. They know I love them. You know, it was like, they know my heart's fucking broken. They can't live without their sister, you know. They fucking know about that pinky swear. You know, I just assumed it would be you know, it was just like, it's just expected. And that purse string broke. And I woke up the next morning on the floor, this massive at the back of my head, so I must have fallen backwards when I hit the cement. Just this huge lump on the back of my head, and I called my mom. And this has happened so many times over the years, not even before Mara or after Mara died. This happened so many times over the years because I never knew just how mentally ill I was, and how her suicide attempts and all that trauma that I was put through as a kid, and all those times saying she couldn't live, and all those days spent at this cemetery as a kid, and all my sister's suicide attempts. It was just like in my family, it was in your DNA. If you were just minorly inconvenienced, if something went wrong, I'm gonna fucking kill myself about it. I'm just gonna, I just want to die. And honestly, Mara's the first one that actually went through with it. And I say the first because my niece followed in her tracks a year later, my goddaughter. Just a year younger. But like I called my mom and she's like, what happened? And I would just say, I don't remember. And she would just say, okay. And she'd take me to the hospital and I would throw a fit till they gave me whatever painkillers, the best painkillers I could get. They'd put me in the hospital for a few days and then I'd discharge myself when the hold was over. I'd do it all again. And it just kept happening over and over again. And I'd also sit there up all night. I'd go on these binges for days, stay up all night, and cut myself off from the world, and hack into her iPhone. I spent hours breaking into her iCloud. She had 5 different Instagrams, 4 different Snapchats. I got into every single one of them. And I would read every single thing, and no matter how painful it was. Thank God I don't remember, because she's a 15-year-old girl and she's just like me, so we fought like fiercely. So of course she's like, my mom's a bitch, I hate my mom, as I've said a million times over the years, as a kid and even as an adult. You don't mean it, but it still hurts. So I'd read those things and I'd watch her YouTube videos. You could go back on her YouTube history, and I have the chronological order memorized of the videos she watched that night leading up to the suicide. Some of them were just like standard, teenage girl stuff. And the other stuff was like, what really happens when you die? What happens to your family after a suicide? What happens after a failed suicide attempt? All these, she was just gearing up for it. And then she'd kind of switch back and, you'd just see her mentality. And then I'd look at that picture. And then once I got in her Snapchat and I looked at that Friday before the 12th. And the big mystery, there wasn't the mystery of why, because I knew there was some bullying, and I knew she always struggled with anxiety, and she's been struggling with schoolwork, and I was a hurt mother too. I wasn't perfect, so of course I blame myself. But her schoolwork got to be so much of a burden, and the obligations that she had at school, and it became such a source of contention between us that I had to force myself to stop looking at her grades, because it would be a fight and just fight, and that never ended well. So it was just like, step back. I'm going to let her heal and just work. If she's going to hit that rock bottom, and she's going to pick herself up. Just going to let her work through this. She's in counseling. She's going to group. We're doing all the things. She's taking the antidepressants, or, hypothetically in my head. But when I looked at Snapchat on that Friday, she looked at her grades, and she panned down the screen, and every single one was an F. Like she had hit that rock bottom. I also learned that she had been skipping school, she was gone more than she was present. And, you get the notifications from the school, but there was always, I was late for English, or this ran over. There was always something always an explanation. And I just, okay, things happen, blah, blah, blah. I trusted her, just like I trusted her with the medication, because I didn't see just how bad she was suffering and how hurt she was. But I think that obligation and that torment, those days leading up to it, how many times she would call me and say, it'd be 9 a.m. and she's like, Mom, I'm in the bathroom. I can't bring myself to go to class. And I'm like, Mara, why? I don't understand. Like, I just didn't understand that anxiety and that how bad she was suffering. I do now because I've experienced, fight that every day now. But at that time, I was like, you're 15. What do you have to be worried about? What do you have to be stressed about? I give you everything you want. You're beautiful. It's this perfect, magical human, unicorn of a human. I just didn't get it. And for once, I was in this relationship with a good guy, and I was happy. And just like she said in her note, stay happy. And that guilt of just how happy I was and how I just wasn't in tune like I should have been. When I'd see her slouching, I would say, stand up straight, hold your head high, we're leaders, we're not followers, stand up straight. Like those things that I'm trying to work or build confidence and make her a strong, confident, brave woman. But instead, I was just like, I think I was just tearing her down and making her feel less than. So that last day I picked her up from school, she got in and she was just slouched over. And I remember as soon as she got in saying, sit up straight. And I just fucking hate myself for that. Just like, it's just a mom thing, but I'm sure moms say it all the time. But God, just, just the thought that your mom doesn't care about your grades, she probably thought I just didn't care. She had all F's and Mom didn't give a shit. But I was actively forcing myself to not give a shit because I gave a shit. And then that pinky swore just killed me. So about 6 weeks after she died, I went back to work after 9 days because I knew if I sat home, I was like, idle hands, I will kill myself. I need to go back to work. So I went back to work after 9 days. And they were all like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, I need this. Just keep me busy. But I was insane. I mean, the stuff I was, doing on outside of work or in the bathroom just to get through the day, just to keep, just to function and put one foot in front of the other. It's just so shameful. And after that one attempt where I ended up in the hospital, I got fired. And my psychiatrist, the psychologist, the first one I'd ever had in my life, I'd had a few in adulthood, but it was very frowned upon as a child. Mental health was you just don't touch it. And you definitely don't tell people your problems. And I was very, very invested in Carol, and she'd helped me leading up to the suicide and saw me in both aspects, that little girl and that grieving mother, and then I didn't have insurance anymore. So she fired me as her therapist, as 6 weeks after my daughter died, as her client. She was like, this place has got a sliding scale. They'll be fine. And that did so much damage to me. And from that point forward, I didn't talk to anybody. I did. I talked to my friends when we were high, when we were getting fucked up. I talked to people at the bar. Anybody who would, give me the time of day, I would be like, my daughter killed herself. Let me tell you about Mara. Her name is Mara Lynn. She's named after me. I just want to go into all the details. And I would do it just like I am now without a single tear because I had that shell, and I just get fucking wild, crazy drunk, just drinking straight vodka. And I would just hang out with the people that I thought of as less than, so I would feel greater than. And I was like the queen of the hillbillies. And I loved it, and I thrived on it. But then it'd get to that point in the night where I'd be having a great time, and then that something would switch, and I'd go, all of a sudden I'd see her face, or I'd see those bloody eyes, and when I blink, And I'd go home and just try to kill myself. Just lock myself in the garage, let the car run. Try to hang myself, take a handful of pills or whatever it was. And then when I would come out of the hospital or magically just wake up the next day, yeah, I'd be pissed I was still alive, but I'd also feel reborn. Like, it's like, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but it made sense in my mind. And I did that for 4 years. I bounced from job to job. I did have one for quite a while, but, I just did whatever I want. I was supposed to work till 5. I just started leaving at 3:30 till they just thought that's when my shift ended. I just I'm leaving. I would run to my dealer's house or whatever. And then I lost my car and I got evicted and everything fell apart right around when I hung myself and failed. And I didn't have anywhere to go, so I ended up moving to a small town back by my mom. It just saved my life getting out of Sioux Falls is the large city nearby us. It's 200,000 people, not huge, but it's huge for Midwest, South Dakota, Minnesota area. So getting out of it and breaking away from those people was the start of it, but I was still massively addicted. My mom had been doling out her medication since I was a little girl, one a day. And of course, at that point I was massively addicted, so it was more of a battle at that point where I would take one a day. That's generous. It was very rarely just one a day. And then, I don't want to go into the specifics of the breakdown, but last summer I just fucking lost it. I hit that rock bottom so hard. I had been starting to come out of it, and wanting help and wanting to live. I saw the light, I could feel that fire in me a little bit. I had been beaten down so much, and I'd had a sexual assault from when I was wasted, multiples over the years actually, and I ended up losing my ability to have children. I had to have a full hysterectomy from the damage done. So, and that, of course, while I was wasted, I had this massive ulcer from the straight vodka that I'd been drinking for 4 years, just straight vodka, water to chase. I mean, if I was feeling, if I wanted a chaser, most of the time I would just drink it straight. And the alcohol was just if there was nothing else available. If I didn't have the money for what I really wanted, what would really, medicate me. I just fucking lost it. And I ended up checking myself in, not a rehab. I took myself into mental health because my mental health was so bad. I had ripped an IV out of my arm. I tried to jump out of a moving vehicle with my mom, driving down the interstate. I did not recognize myself. I hated myself. I'd be screaming at people for, that I've never met before just because of a minor inconvenience, and I'd go off on them about Mara's death, and I'm like, what am I doing? I've never even met this person. It is not his fault, but I can't stop myself. And I was just losing it so much. And I still couldn't cry. And it was just all built up. So I checked myself in the hospital, and actually it ended up being really traumatic. It was a very traumatic couple days there. Because of, it's the same hospital that I've been in multiple times over the years, but also the same hospital that Mara was in, and the same hospital that prescribed her the Wellbutrin, that killed her, that I am so angry at them for. And now I'm like, please help me not die. And so I had so much rage, and also that trauma of the sexual assaults was really starting to rear its head, and those memories were starting to come back. And they knew that, and I'd asked specifically, they'd said only women, attendees or whatever in her room. And I'd asked for that, and they agreed to it. And then there was a man that came in, and he reminded me of a very It was very activating of my trauma. And I really kind of lost it again at the hospital. And I ended up checking myself out because of that, because I was so mad at them because I let a man come into my room. You know, it's so silly in hindsight, but at the time it was huge, the principle of it. And I checked myself out, and I just went down Google and just started calling around for female therapists that would take the insurance that I did have at the time, and just went down and just first one that could take me in. And I just lucked out, and I connected with her really well. And then, you know, I had a insurance switch, so she wasn't able to see me, but she connected me to somebody else who has become my life rock right now in the last couple months. And she really, all she has to do is just be there. We don't even do in office anymore. We just do telehealth over the internet. And just to have her listening and just talk to her about those things that I've never shared with anybody that I held so deep. And, you know, then letting those tears out, and those first few meetings we had were in person, and I have cried like I've never cried before in those meetings. And she didn't say, you know, she barely said a word. You know, it was just like her aura, her vibe, the comfort. It was very nurturing and mother-like, and she was just all in it to hear my story. And it was just like this sudden freedom, you know, just that little bit. And a couple months in, then. And I'm still like hiding from her the fact that my mom is medicating me. And I say that, I make it sound like she's doing it on purpose, but, you know, and at one point it was probably a control thing, but at some point it became me as an addict. Me became a need versus her narcissistic enmeshment mother style. You know, there's a combination of all the things. But at that point it had gotten volatile, where, you know, it was a very big source of contention in our relationship. And I was like, I cannot have her have this hold over me. I cannot have anything have this hold over me anymore. And one day I woke up and I went to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and they were very welcoming. And I cried. And I still go to the NA. I don't do the steps. You know, I kind of just took the whole staircase instead of the individual steps. But right now I just need to focus on the mental health aspect and not try to kill myself every day. I'm 130 days clean from, you know, it's been a long time since I've used that drug of choice, even longer than that. But since I've gone over to get that daily doling of the medication, you know, I haven't drank. I quit smoking. I started exercising. And that's a struggle with, too. I have a massive eating disorder, too, because of childhood trauma. Lisa, the sister that I thought of as my other mother, she would force feed me food. I was very picky, and Mom, you know, like I said, she was very neglectful. So I had very small stomach, and I was very just thin child anyway. And Lisa would just force feed food in me, physically restrain me until I would gag. And I didn't quite put that together with my eating disorder, you know, make that connection. You know, I've always had that superficial, and I know that goes back to the childhood because of how long, or because of the fact that they always just, that was all that I had going for me. I had no talent. My mom still hear it in the words coming out of her mouth that Wendy's not mechanically inclined. She said that in 1994, and my sister has repeated it to me at least once a year, every year since. So it's like a revenge thing. It's like, yeah, I am fucking mechanically inclined. I am technologically advanced as well, and I'm really fucking smart too, and I'm funny, and I am talented. I'm an artist. I'm a dancer. I'm a singer, and I can do things that I don't even know about yet. And my family just held me down so much, where it was all I was good for was just the looks. I remember a very specific instance just recently, before, you know, I got cleaned and woke up from the dissociated state I was in for 4 years. But I was trying to go back to work, and I was prepping for this interview I was really excited about. And she's like, they'd be fools not to hire you. You have so much going for you. She's like, you have your looks. Did you get, and then she'd trail off into something else. Like either she'd forget or it was all she could think of was my looks, or she just didn't think it was necessary to finish the sentence. And those little things, like, yeah, I know my mom has BPD too, and, she has trauma, and hurt people hurt. And I try to be the devil's advocate and look at her trauma too and know that she was just a mom doing her best as well. And I try to think of that, but the problem with my mom is she continues to do this over and over, still to this day. Hurt me.
Is the borderline personality disorder the problem that you see?
I think so,
in your
definitely.
daughter and you?
Yes, with Mara, now that I've only been diagnosed, 90 days maybe. And like I said, once I started reading about it and looking at the symptoms and going over my life, like, oh my God, I'm a textbook case. I get it. With my mom, I always thought she was a covert narcissist because, everything was so about her, but she was everybody looked at her as a saint from the outside. But I think now knowing what I know, and after our recent fights, and now I've actually had to cut my family completely out of my life, which is very painful, but it's also the most freeing thing, and I've never been happier. But now looking back, I think my mom definitely had BPD as well. And she has that soft side, that soft little girl. I see that in her, and that nurturing mother. But she also has that rough shell. And she does that too. And she, head held high, and her chin darts forward, kind of like mine. And when she gets that rough exterior comes out, that woman, you don't want to be around that woman. And I followed in suit, and I just hate the person that I became all of my adult life. I knew I had a power about me when I would enter a room that I could, if I was smiling, if I was happy, it would be like, yay, Wendy's here, party's here. And, people would cheer when I'd walk in the bar. But if I had that, if I'd have those dead eyes, or if my chin or my jaw would be darted out, or if I, had my head a little too high, then they know that I would just suck the life out of that fucking room. And I was miserable, and I was going to make everybody in that room miserable, and I was not happy until it was done. And sadly, that is how I felt. Like, I didn't see it like that, but that's what I was doing. This world had hurt me for so long, and I had been dismissed and ignored for so long that you're going to hear me now. And that's why I was so vicious. And, every fight that I've had, whether it be about this or that, what I'm really fighting for is that little girl on the inside being hurt. And somebody to stop and say, I'm a person. I'm a woman. I'm unapologetically woman. I'm not Max, I am Wendy, and I am born with a naturally sassy pelvis, and I am born fucking beautiful and too fucking bad. Don't punish me for that. Don't punish me because of just the person that I was born as. But I also would use that as that would be my fire too, fuck you. I'm Wendy fucking, I don't want to say my last name, but I would be like, when I'm, woman, hear me roar, like you are going to regret the day you looked at me funny. I think Mara definitely was beginning to show the signs of BPD. The eating disorder, like I said, that was painfully aware. But looking at those videos and her internet history, I know, the bullying. She had some bullying going on. A lot of body image issues, she was just a very self-conscious person. She dropped out of gymnastics because they made her take her socks off because she hated her feet that much. So she was definitely had that body dysmorphia, but she would have those two sides, and I think those two sides of her were just starting to come out, and she was just too sensitive for this world, and she didn't have that tough shell exterior, She didn't have that. She hadn't built that that hard candy coating on the outside yet and couldn't handle this world. There's a lot of people, I've gone through some other things that have really impacted my mental health. I started getting letters after Mara died. Well, a letter. It was a picture. If you do a reverse image search on Google of this image, it brings you back to suicidal overdose on Wikipedia. It's the picture on that page. And in text. And it was addressed to, it was my maiden name and married name hyphenated. And I always kept my married name because I hated that little girl. I was ashamed of her, but also because I hated my ex-husband. I wanted to spite him. So it was addressed to my maiden, or Wendy, maiden, and then married last name. And it said, "Glad she did it, you should too." And I came home from work that day, I got it, and this was within that first year of after she died. And I found it on my couch, but here's the thing though, I could have gotten them, I was in such a dissociated state, I would forget, was lucky I could remember my name. You forget what you're going to get when you walk into the kitchen, like that sort of thing. But I just could not remember what I did yesterday. I couldn't remember 20 minutes ago. So I couldn't remember. I found this note on my couch, and it had postmarked. I could have taken it out of the mailbox and just kind of absently did it, but it was in my couch, or on my couch in my house when I found it. Or at least when it got my attention. I opened it, and again, I saw myself fall on the ground. I didn't scream and cry.
Who sent you that?
We don't know. Went to the cops, and actually the detective was the same detective that told me she died that day. I didn't remember that. He did, though. And he was like, "We're going to take DNA." They took my DNA and my fingerprints, so, because I'd touched it, obviously, and anybody else who had. And he was like, "We're going to get to the bottom of this. Who would say such a, who would do this? And I thought, he's invested. He was there. He saw my pain. He knows. He saw my daughter. He was there. And then a couple months went by, and I called him finally, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I got it right here on the desk. We got the DNA back. Wasn't a match, so we're closing it. Good luck." It's just like, oh God. I don't know. And you know what? I did want to die, and I was actively trying to kill myself, like I said, every day. But that hatred, and it was like somebody can come and tell me to kill myself all day and I mean, I have been through domestic abuse and sexual abuse and all sorts of abuse in my life, but for them to say that about Mara was just, oh my God, it just that rage in me. I still don't know to this day who did it. I wouldn't be surprised if it was somebody in my family, actually, but I also think, teenagers and kids, they're just fucking assholes.
There's just cruel people out there.
Yeah, and she did have some bullies. And I learned about that on, reading through her phone.
It's not even worth.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me change the topic. Yeah. You seem so much more stable and better now.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, how did you do that? What do you...
Well... On my own, like I said, I took myself to an A, and it's just one day at a time. I would live 1 hour at a time when I needed to. But I think just that motivation that I had seen so much. I have seen the worst, the best and the worst of everybody in my life. And everybody that I loved had abandoned me in one way or another. And yes, I completely isolated and pushed them away. I do acknowledge that. But to me, I was 100% abandoned by everybody I loved. Like, I might as well have died with Mara that day. And I was angry about it. And what I did is, I started going to the therapy, like I said. And I saw a psychiatrist, started taking medication for the PTSD, for the impulse control. So I stopped trying to kill myself, for the anxiety. Also, like, got that ulcer, taking care of the reproductive issues. I had that hysterectomy, to take care of that stuff, and just like taking care of myself. But basically what I did is I locked myself in my house. My social anxiety got so bad. I was so terrified of seeing, I would call it people BMD before Mara died. Someone BMD, whether it be a kid from school or somebody from my life that I knew. I just felt like I was such an imposter walking around playing a role of Wendy, like I was just this ghost of Wendy walking around in Wendy's body, and I was just playing this role. So when I'd see those people from BMD before Mara died, like I would get sick to my stomach, and I'd throw up, or I'd have to drink or pop pills or take a handful of pills. It just would drive me nuts. But then the people afterwards were all like not bad people, like they're all hurt people too, with trauma and, drug addicts and whatnot. They've all got their own stories. And they were my friends. They supported me when I needed them. But like I said, I've evolved past them. And so I had this fear of seeing people before and the people after. And it was like, if I'd see them, it was like, I know I'd use, or I'd want to go get drunk, or whatever. So I just had to lock myself in the house. And I started doing the telehealth with my therapist, and I just religiously made sure I took my medication every single day as intended. And magically, it's wild, but if you take the medication as directed, it will actually do what they tell you. And I started to just feel better. I had a lot of fights with my mom, and there was a lot of, I couldn't go over to her house because, I could just reach into her nightstand, or just, if I put on her sweatshirt because I was cold, you just reach in the pocket and there'd be painkillers or benzos in there, and just, she'd leave them around willy-nilly. I couldn't trust myself. So I had to keep them at arm's length to protect me, but also to protect my mom, because I had gotten so vicious in my, with the trauma that was coming up and the anger. But also the grief, but also we were so enmeshed together that I was just so vicious and borderline abusive towards her now. So I did that. And I had literally nothing, not a pot to piss in. I'd lost my job, and my car was going to get repossessed. And I didn't know what I was going to do one day to the next, but I did it one day at a time. I just put one foot in front of the other and woke up early every day, did yoga, listened to music, journaled, just did it. If it felt right, I did it. Just pushed myself a little tiny bit every single day. And I made this slogan for myself and I put it in my journal. And it just says, just don't do worse. And I did like the little Nike slogan under it. Just don't do worse. That's my slogan for myself. As long as I'm not doing worse today, I'm doing better. Like one day, just a little bit better. And gradually, I'm just doing really well. Going back to work was really hard for me because that was my lifeline before Mara died. My work was where I had my value. And there's a whole lot of trauma in that, which I won't get into today. But then when I died with Mara that day, and I'm walking around dressed in my office clothes and whatnot, and looking prim and proper and perfectly accessorized and whatnot, but on the inside I was just like a mush. So and I would, as soon as I would get done with work, I would go every day for happy hour. And again, alcohol was not my drug. I didn't even like the taste of alcohol. I would just do it straight for the buzz. Like, that's why I would do the vodka, as quick and painless as possible. Just get me drunk as quick as you can. It would be my motivation, like if I could just get till 5, or like or whatever time I designate, if I can just work till 4 today, then I can go treat myself, I would say. Like I earned it, I worked 7 hours, I deserve a good buzz or whatever. So going back to work was really hard for me, and I ended up actually, had no money, still struggling very much on that aspect. But I got a temp job, and it just so happened the HR person is my cousin, like the only cousin on my I am not close with anybody in my family, very few in my family, mostly on my mother's side, not really on my dad's side. But she is the only one that I've ever liked and who has ever made me feel like a human being. And I work with her. And technically, I'm still a temp right now. But the hours are gradually increasing. They have a gym there. They have wellness, like, oh God, it's just like, they're so wonderful. Like, I go there and they never once made me feel like a temp. Like, I actually kind of want to tear up about how they make me feel like I belong there. And nobody's ever done that.
And the stability of work helps ground you. And
it's like, I've never even left at 4:59. Like, I'm just so eager to just do the best I can and show them all those things. All those things, I'm not just a pretty face, or I'm not just a Wendy Weiner, as my siblings would call me, when it was always Wendy, or I'm not Beaner, as the nickname they gave me, those racist assholes. I'm a person. I'm really good at, my job. I've taken a step backwards in my career as far as like my responsibilities. It's very elementary, like something I did when I was 20, literally. But I'm so good at it and I love it. And like every day, I'm just so happy just being there, and I don't think about when I get to go to lunch so I can go get high, or when I get off work, I'm like excited to go home and see Livia, or like excited to make, what am I going to cook for dinner?
It's nice to see you being able to smile.
Yeah. I do still struggle with the eating disorder side of it. Like I said, I just figured out that it goes back to the force feeding aspect from my father or my stepdad, and that I'm still working on. But other than that, everything else is perfect. Like, I'm just so happy. I don't have a pot to piss in, but I just am so grateful to wake up every morning. Like, I wake up at 5 excited to start the day, instead of being mad that I woke up. I'm like excited. Like, yes, I get to breathe. I get to go smile and hug my daughter and hug Ash. And, I don't have to worry about the drama or the fighting and the family and all that. And, if I don't have the money, it's okay. It's just money. It's just, I will get back on my feet again. But what's more important to me is just like being mentally here and present. Being mentally aware of what's going on and soaking everything in the moment. And just living for, doing each day as if I'm doing it for Mara. Making that little girl in me happy and then living for Mara.
Beautiful.
That's all I got.
It's nice to see hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a lot of hope. First time in my life.
Beautiful story.
Thank you.
Thank you,
That's all
Wendy.
I got. Yeah, thanks.